At my son-in-law's promotion party, he said into the microphone, "My mother-in-law only came because she heard there would be good food." I smiled. "And on Monday, I canceled the mortgage check. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I spent 3 hours getting ready for Richard's promotion party. At 66, it takes longer to look presentable. I carefully applied my makeup, styled my gray hair, and put on my navy blue dress, the one Rebecca always said made me look elegant. I wanted to make my daughter proud. The venue was extravagant, a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Boston skyline. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne, and a jazz band played softly in the corner. Everything screamed success, just like Richard always wanted. "Mom, you made it," Rebecca rushed over, air-kissing both my cheeks. She looked beautiful in her black dress, though I noticed she seemed tense, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Of course I came, dear. I wouldn't miss Richard's big moment." Rebecca nodded, already glancing over my shoulder at other guests. "The Robertsons just arrived. I need to greet them. Richard's boss, you know. Help yourself to something to eat, Mom." I wandered through the crowded room, exchanging pleasantries with strangers who barely made eye contact. I recognized a few faces from family gatherings, but most were Richard's colleagues, younger, polished professionals with sharp suits and sharper ambitions. I found a quiet corner with a good view of the stage. The thought of all those mortgage checks I'd written over the past 3 years crossed my mind. "Just until Richard gets established," Rebecca had begged when they found their dream home. "We can't afford it yet, but his career is taking off. It's just temporary, Mom." Temporary had turned into 36 monthly checks of $2,400 each. Money from my late husband's life insurance, meant to secure my retirement. I never told anyone I was helping them. Rebecca insisted it would humiliate Richard if people knew. The room hushed as Richard took the stage, champagne glass in hand, his easy confidence filling the space. My son-in-law had always been charismatic. That charm had initially blinded me to the small cruelties, the dismissive glances, the way he spoke over me at family dinners. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Richard began, his smile dazzling under the spotlights. "This promotion has been years in the making," I smiled, genuinely happy for his success. Perhaps now they could finally take over their mortgage. I see many faces who've supported me on this journey, my bosses who recognized my potential. He nodded toward a table of executives. My colleagues who've pushed me to excel. More nods. And of course, my beautiful wife, Rebecca. Rebecca beamed, raising her glass. The crowd applauded. And Richard's eyes found me in the corner, and something shifted in his expression. A slight smirk. "I see my mother-in-law Martha is here, too." A spotlight suddenly found me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as all eyes turned my way. "The mother-in-law only came because she heard there would be good food," Richard continued, his voice playful but with an edge I recognized all too well. Laughter rippled through the room. Not kind laughter. The uncomfortable kind that comes when someone has said something inappropriate but has enough power that people feel obligated to respond. I maintained my smile, feeling it freeze on my face. 3 years of mortgage payments, 36 checks written in secret to preserve his precious pride. And this was how he saw me. A greedy old woman who showed up for free meals. Rebecca was laughing too, though her eyes darted nervously to gauge my reaction. She knew. She knew exactly what that comment meant, what it revealed about how Richard talked about me when I wasn't present. The spotlight moved away. Richard continued his speech, but I could no longer hear the words over the roaring in my ears. People around me avoided eye contact, a few offering sympathetic glances. When the speech ended and the crowd dispersed back to mingling, I quietly gathered my purse and shawl. No one noticed as I slipped out the door, took the elevator down, and called a taxi. The next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with my checkbook open, I stared at the blank check I'd been about to fill out. Richard's words echoed in my mind. For the first time, I saw clearly what I had become to them. Not a mother, not family, just an ATM with gray hair. My hand didn't shake at all as I wrote "canceled" across the check for this month's mortgage. Payment. Then I opened my phone and scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor for Monday. The old Martha would have kept writing those checks, kept smiling through the humiliation. But something broke inside me last night, and something stronger took its place. The phone rang at 7:43 a.m. Tuesday morning, jolting me from my first peaceful sleep in months. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "What the hell, Mom?" Her voice crackled with fury. "The mortgage payment bounced. The bank called Richard." I sat up, adjusting my pillows against the headboard. "Good. Morning to you too, Rebecca." "This isn't funny. Richard is livid. We have a payment history to maintain. Do you realize what this does to our credit score?" I looked out my bedroom window at the maple tree I'd planted with John 30 years ago. Its leaves were just beginning to turn golden. "I canceled the check," I said calmly. There was a moment of stunned silence before Rebecca's voice returned, lower now. "You? What? Why would you do that?" "I think you know why. Mom, if this is about Richard's joke at the party." "Was it a joke, Rebecca? Because jokes are meant to be funny. I didn't find it very amusing to be humiliated in front of a room full of strangers." Rebecca sighed dramatically. "You're overreacting. Richard was just trying to lighten the mood. That's his sense of humor." "Making fun of the woman who's been paying your mortgage for 3 years is his sense of humor?" Another silence, longer this time. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had shifted to the coaxing tone she'd used since childhood whenever she wanted something. "Mom, please. It was just one bad joke. You know how Richard gets when he's nervous. He didn't mean anything by it." I closed my eyes, remembering all the jokes over the years. Richard commenting on my outdated clothes at Thanksgiving. Richard asking if I'd finally figured out how to use a smartphone at Christmas. Richard wondering aloud if I was still capable of driving on my birthday. This isn't just about the party, Rebecca. It's about respect, or rather, the lack of it. "So you're punishing us financially because your feelings got hurt?" Her voice rose again. "That's incredibly petty, Mom." The old Martha would have crumbled at that accusation. The old Martha would have apologized, written a new check, maybe even added extra to make up for the inconvenience. But the woman who walked out of that party 2 nights ago wasn't the same person anymore. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply stopping something I should have never started. Richard makes 6 figures. You work full-time. You're both in your 40s. There's no reason I should be paying your mortgage. We were counting on that money." Rebecca's control was slipping, panic edging into her voice. "We have the villa booking in Tuscany next month, and we just ordered new furniture for the sunroom." I felt a chill spread through my chest. "You've been using my mortgage payments to fund luxury vacations and furniture? That's not... I didn't mean..." Rebecca stumbled over her words. "We needed that money for the mortgage so we could afford other things. That's how budgets work, Mom." "I see. And here I thought I was helping you keep a roof over your heads, not subsidizing your lifestyle." "You're being cruel." Rebecca's voice broke. "After everything we've done for you." That stopped me short. "What exactly have you done for me, Rebecca?" We invite you to all our events. We call you on holidays. Richard fixed your garbage disposal last year. I almost laughed at the absurdity. And in exchange, I've given you over $86,000. The line went quiet. I could hear Rebecca breathing, probably struggling to find another angle to manipulate me. "Mom," she finally said, her voice honey-sweet again. "I know you're upset. Let's not let one misunderstanding ruin our relationship. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We can talk this through like adults. I'm not coming to dinner, Rebecca, and I'm not writing any more checks. You can't just cut us off like this. All pretense of sweetness vanished. What kind of mother abandons her family? That word, abandons, hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I was back in that rooftop restaurant, frozen in the spotlight, while strangers laughed at Richard's joke. I haven't abandoned anyone, I said quietly. I've just stopped being used. Dad would be so disappointed in you. My late husband's memory was her final weapon, one she knew would wound me deepest. But instead of pain, I felt a strange clarity. No, Rebecca. John would be disappointed that his daughter is treating his wife this way. I heard a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of a door slamming in the background. Richard wants to talk. To you, Rebecca said tersely. Tell Richard I said congratulations again on his promotion. Now he can finally afford his own mortgage. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't let go of their cash cow without a fight. But for the first time since John died, I felt like myself again. The phone immediately rang again. I turned it off and went to make a cup of tea. Whatever storm was coming, I would face it on my terms, not theirs. 3 days of blessed silence ended when my doorbell rang Thursday afternoon. I peered through the peephole to find my son Michael standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. Unlike Rebecca, Michael had always been the peacemaker in the family. "Hey, Mom," he said when I opened the door, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Got time for coffee?" I studied his face, so much like his father's, and saw the tension around his eyes. "Rebecca called you, didn't she?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "Can we talk inside?" In the kitchen, I busied myself making coffee while Michael sat at the table, fidgeting with a coaster. My son had never been good at hiding his feelings. "Rebecca's pretty upset," he finally said as I set a steaming mug in front of him. "I imagine she is." I took the seat across from him. "Did she tell you why?" Michael nodded. "She said you cut them off because of some joke Richard made. She thinks you're overreacting." "And what do you think?" He stared into his coffee. "I think there's probably more to the story." I told him everything. The 3 years of mortgage payments, the countless loans that were never repaid, and finally, the public humiliation at the promotion party. Michael's face darkened. That was a shitty thing for Richard to say. Yes, it was. I wrapped my hands around my mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. But it was also revealing. It showed me exactly what they think of me. Still, Mom, cutting off the mortgage. Payments without warning. That's pretty harsh. I raised an eyebrow. Did you know I was paying their mortgage? He had the grace to look embarrassed. Rebecca mentioned something once about you helping them out. Did she mention I've given them over $86,000? Michael's eyes widened. Jesus, Mom? No, she definitely didn't mention that part. And did you know they've been using that money to fund vacations to Tuscany and new furniture? He shook his head, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Michael, I'm not cutting them off to be cruel. I'm cutting them off because I've finally realized I'm being used. My son was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca said Dad would have wanted you to help them. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Your father would have wanted his grown children to stand on their own 2 feet. He worked hard so I would be taken care of in my old age. Not so Rebecca and Richard could have Italian vacations. Michael nodded slowly, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. My stomach tightened. What? Richard. He talks about you sometimes, when you're not around. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. Not very nicely. What does he say? Michael shifted in his seat. Just jokes. about how you're always asking about their finances, how you're stingy with your money. I felt like I'd been slapped. Stingy? I've given them $86,000. I know, Mom. I didn't know about all that until today. What else does he say? Michael's discomfort was palpable. It's not important. It is to me. He sighed. He calls you, the Bank of Martha, says you're keeping track of every penny so you can hold it over their heads someday. Each word was a knife twist. And Rebecca? Does she correct him when he says these things? Michael's silence was answer enough. The doorbell rang again, saving him from having to respond. I opened it to find my neighbor Grace holding a casserole dish. Martha. I made too much lasagna. Thought you might like some. I invited her in, grateful for the interruption. Grace had been my friend for 20 years, a straight-talking widow who never minced words. After quick introductions, Grace settled at the table while I made her coffee. Michael, clearly relieved by the buffer, asked about her garden. It's coming. Along nicely, though not as lovely as your mother's, Grace said, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. Actually, Martha, I've been meaning to talk to you about something I overheard at the Miller's barbecue last month. I tensed, sensing what was coming. That son-in-law of yours was there, Richard, right? Handsome fellow, but my word, what a mouth on him. Grace shook her head. He was telling some folks by the drinks table about your pension, calling you, and I apologize for repeating this, an ATM with wrinkles. Michael looked stricken. He didn't. I'm afraid he did, Grace confirmed. Said something about how handy it was having a mother-in-law with a fat retirement account and no one to spend it on but herself. The room fell silent. I stood at the counter, my back to them, fighting to control my emotions. Mom, I'm so sorry, Michael finally said. I had no idea it was that bad. I turned around, surprised to find I felt more resolved than hurt. Well, now we all know exactly where we stand. Grace reached over and patted my hand. You know what my Harold used to say? When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I nodded, suddenly grateful for Richard's public joke. Without it, I might have continued writing those checks for years, blind to the contempt behind their smiling faces. Michael stayed for another hour. When he left, he hugged me tightly. I'll talk to Rebecca, he promised. This isn't right. I watched him drive away, not holding out much hope. Rebecca had always been stubborn, and she'd chosen a husband who matched her in that regard. That night. I pulled out the box of financial records I'd been keeping meticulously for years. Loan after loan, check after check, all neatly documented with dates and amounts. Some for the mortgage, some for emergencies, that somehow always coincided with luxury purchases. As I leafed through the papers, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just about one insulting joke. This was about years of being taken advantage of by the people who should have cared for me most. It was time to close the Bank of Martha, permanently. I spent the next morning at Coastal Credit Union with Harriet, the financial advisor who had helped me manage my money since John's passing. She peered at me over her glasses as I explained the situation. Let me get this straight, Martha. You've been paying your daughter and son-in-law's mortgage for 3 years without telling anyone? I nodded, feeling embarrassed now that I was saying it out loud. And you want to know how much you've given them in total? Yes. I've kept records, but I want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Harriet typed rapidly on her keyboard, her lips thinning as she reviewed my accounts. Martha, there are numerous withdrawals here, not just the monthly mortgage payments. She turned the monitor so I could see. Besides the $2,400 monthly mortgage payments, there were dozens of other withdrawals. $5,000 for Rebecca's car repair, $3,200 for Richard's dental work, $7,500 for kitchen emergency, $4,800 for roof repair. Do you remember authorizing all these? My stomach clenched as I nodded. Each one had come with a desperate phone call, a tearful explanation of why they needed the money immediately. Each time, I'd written a check without question. Martha, adding everything up, the mortgage payments and these other withdrawals, you've given them approximately $127,000 over the past 3 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. I knew it was substantial, but hearing the total made me lightheaded. That's about a third of your retirement savings, Harriet said gently. I gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady myself. I had no idea it was that much. Harriet removed her glasses, her expression softening. Martha, I've been meaning to talk to you about this pattern for a while. This level of financial support isn't sustainable for someone on a fixed income. At this rate, you'll deplete your savings within 7 years. 7 years. I was only 66. With modern medicine, I could easily live another 20 years or more. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. What should I do? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. First, you need to stop the withdrawals, which you've already done. Second, you might want to consider talking to an elder law attorney about protecting your assets. Do you think that's necessary? Harriet hesitated. Martha, when family members become accustomed to accessing someone's funds this way, they rarely stop willingly. I thought of Rebecca's reaction on the phone, her immediate leap to accusations and emotional manipulation rather than understanding or gratitude for what I'd already done. I'll make an appointment, I said firmly. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the document Harriet had printed out, a complete record of every dollar I'd given to Rebecca and Richard. It was an appalling amount, far more than I'd realized. No wonder they'd become so comfortable with their lifestyle. I'd been subsidizing it all along. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca, arms crossed, foot tapping impatiently. I took a deep breath before opening the door. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. I followed her into the living room, where she paced like a caged animal. Michael says you think we've been using you for money, she said accusingly. Haven't you? Rebecca stopped pacing, her face flushing. We've had some financial difficulties. You offered to help. Did I offer, or did you ask? I picked up Harriet's printout. Did I offer to give you $127,000? Rebecca blinked, momentarily thrown. It can't possibly be that much. It is. I have the records right here. She regained her composure quickly. So what? You're wealthy, Mom. Dad left you well taken care of. What else are you going to spend it on? Perhaps my own retirement? Medical care when I'm older? Or just things that bring me joy rather than funding your and Richard's extravagant lifestyle? Rebecca's expression hardened. This is about Richard's stupid joke, isn't it? You're punishing us because your feelings got hurt. This isn't about punishment. It's about realizing I've been taken advantage of. Taken advantage of? Rebecca laughed bitterly. You've lived in this house for 40 years. Your mortgage is paid off. You have no expenses except your gardening hobby and basic living costs. And that entitles you to my savings? We're family. Family helps each other. Where was that family spirit when Richard was mocking me at his party? Where was it when he called me an ATM with wrinkles at the Miller's barbecue? Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, confirmation that she knew about that comment. He was just joking around. No, Rebecca. People joke about things they find funny. Richard clearly finds financial exploitation amusing. Exploitation? That's ridiculous. We were going to pay you back. I raised an eyebrow. When? She faltered. When? When we were more financially stable. You make over $200,000 a year between the two of you. You have a mortgage on a house you could never afford without my help. You take luxury vacations and buy designer furniture. When exactly were you planning to become financially stable? The front door opened, and Richard walked in without knocking. His face was flushed with anger. There you are, he said to Rebecca. I told you not to come here alone. I don't recall inviting either of you, I said calmly. Richard turned to, me, his charm nowhere in evidence. Look, Martha, this has gone on long enough. We need that mortgage payment. I held up the financial document. Did you know you and Rebecca have taken $127,000 from me in the last 3 years? He glanced at the paper, unimpressed. So what? You're not exactly hurting for money, and it's not like you have anyone else to spend it on. The callousness of his response left me speechless. Rebecca, perhaps sensing she was losing control of the situation, tried a different approach. Mom, we're family. We've always been there for you. Remember when you had that fall last year? Who drove you to the hospital? You did, I acknowledged. After I called you 3 times. And you complained the entire way about missing your hair appointment. Rebecca flushed. Richard stepped forward, his voice dropping to that persuasive tone he used on clients. Martha, you have to understand our position. We've built a life based on certain financial expectations. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time the calculating man behind the charming facade. I'm not pulling any rug, Richard. I'm simply closing my checkbook. And what about our mortgage? He demanded. Our lifestyle? That sounds like a problem for you to solve. I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. Now, unless you're here to thank me for the $127,000 I've already given you, I think you should leave. Richard's face darkened. You'll regret this. Martha, you're not as independent as you think. The threat hung in the air as I showed them to the door. As I closed it behind them, I realized my hands were steady, my heartbeat calm. The old Martha would have been distraught, desperate to mend fences at any cost. But the woman who stood in the quiet house, listening to their car peel angrily out of the driveway, was no longer afraid of their disapproval. She was too busy rediscovering her dignity. The weeks following my confrontation with Rebecca and Richard brought an icy silence I hadn't experienced since my husband's death. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits demanding money. According to Michael, they were regrouping, which I took to mean plotting their next strategy. I used the quiet to reclaim my life. First, I met with Patricia Winters, an elder law attorney recommended by Harriet. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s, she listened to my story without judgment. Unfortunately, what you're describing is common, she said. Family financial exploitation of seniors is widespread, especially when there's a substantial retirement account involved. I wouldn't call it exploitation exactly. I started, then stopped myself. That was the old Martha talking, making excuses, minimizing the hurt. Patricia's eyes softened. Martha, if someone else told you this story, about a widow whose daughter and son-in-law took $127,000 from her and then mocked her behind her back, what would you call it? I swallowed hard. Exploitation. Exactly. And it rarely stops on its own. She leaned forward. Let's talk about protecting your assets. By the end of our meeting, I had a clear plan, revising my will, setting up a trust with Michael as co-trustee, and creating financial power of attorney documents that explicitly excluded Rebecca and Richard from making decisions for me. What? About my house? I asked. It's the most valuable thing I own. Patricia nodded. We can place it in the trust as well. That way no one can pressure you to sell it or take out loans against it. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of keeping Rebecca and Richard afloat. Now I was taking steps to protect myself, not just my money, but my dignity. I decided to redirect my energy to things that brought me joy. The community garden project had been languishing on my to-do list for months. With newfound resolve, I called Phyllis, the coordinator, and volunteered to head the herb garden committee. Martha, we'd love to have you, she exclaimed. "We meet Thursdays at the community center." That Thursday, I found myself surrounded by a group of enthusiastic gardeners, all eager to transform an abandoned lot into a space where the community could grow food together. "I'm thinking lavender along the southern edge," I suggested during the planning session. "It's drought-resistant and attracts pollinators." "Brilliant idea," said Henry, a retired botanist with kind eyes and a ready smile. "I have some seedlings I could contribute." For 2 hours, we plotted and planned, my expertise in medicinal herbs proving unexpectedly valuable. By the time we broke for coffee, I felt more useful than I had in years. "You certainly know your plants," Henry commented as he handed me a cup. "My husband and I used to grow everything ourselves," I explained. "After he died, I kept it up. It connects me to him somehow." Henry nodded understandingly. "My Margaret passed 5 years ago. The garden was our thing too." We chatted easily, discovering shared interests beyond gardening, classic films, jazz music, traveling. For the first time in ages, I was having a conversation that didn't revolve around someone else's problems or needs. As weeks passed, my involvement with the garden project deepened. I donated herbs from my own garden, helped secure a small grant for irrigation equipment, and found myself looking forward to the Thursday meetings with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in a long time. Henry often walked me to my car afterward, our conversations stretching longer each week. One evening, my phone rang unexpectedly. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom?" Her voice was softer than the last time we'd spoken. "How are you?" "I'm well, thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How are you?" "We're managing." A pause. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Richard and I have been talking, and we think it's time we all sat down together. We'd like to invite you to dinner on Saturday." I hesitated. This sudden olive branch seemed suspicious after weeks of silence. "Just dinner, Mom," Rebecca continued, her voice taking on that persuasive quality I knew so well. A chance to clear the air. No pressure, no agenda. But I knew my daughter. There was always an agenda. "Who else will be there?" "Just us," we thought. It should be intimate, family only. I thought about Patricia's warnings about continued manipulation attempts. I thought about the $127,000 already gone. I thought about ATM with wrinkles. "I'd be happy to come to dinner," I said finally. Rebecca exhaled audibly. "Wonderful. 7 o'clock? Richard is making his famous roast chicken." After hanging up, I sat quietly, considering the invitation. This wasn't a peace offering, it was a tactical move. They'd had time to realize that angry confrontations wouldn't work, so now they were shifting to a gentler approach. The goal remained the same. Access to my money. I called Michael to get his perspective. "They invited you to dinner?" He sounded surprised. "That's interesting timing." "What do you mean?" "Well," he hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but Richard's been having some issues at work. The promotion isn't going as smoothly as he expected, and their mortgage company sent a notice about late payments." I absorbed this information, the pieces falling into place. Of course they wanted to clear the air now. They needed me again. "I told Rebecca I'd come," I said. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Mom?" "Yes," I said firmly. "But I'll be going." In with my eyes wide open. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully in a deep blue blouse and black slacks. Elegant but not trying too hard. I brought a bottle of wine, not the expensive kind I would have chosen before, but a respectable mid-range selection. As I drove to their home, the beautiful colonial with the mortgage I'd been paying, I felt oddly calm. The old Martha would have been anxious, desperate to smooth things over at any cost. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth. I parked in the driveway, noticing how immaculate the landscaping looked. The garden emergency I'd funded last. Spring had certainly yielded beautiful results. Rebecca opened the door before I could ring the bell, greeting me with an enthusiastic hug that felt rehearsed. "Mom, you look wonderful. Come in, come in." Richard appeared in the hallway, all smiles and charm, as if our last encounter had never happened. "Martha, so good to see you. Can I take your coat? That wine looks delicious." I handed him the bottle, meeting his gaze steadily. His smile faltered slightly before he recovered. "Dinner's almost ready. Why don't we have a drink in the living room first?" I followed them into their perfectly appointed living room, noting the new furniture, likely the sunroom pieces Rebecca had mentioned during our argument. I sat on the edge of the sofa, declining Richard's offer of a cocktail in favor of water. "So?" I said pleasantly. "You wanted to clear the air." Rebecca and Richard exchanged glances. The trap was set. Now it was time to see if I would walk into it willingly, or if I had finally learned to recognize the bait. Richard cleared his throat, setting his wine glass down with calculated precision. "Martha, we've had some time to reflect on everything that's happened." "Yes," Rebecca chimed in, her voice honeyed with false sincerity. "We realize there's been a breakdown in communication." I sipped my water, waiting. Years of experience had taught me that when Rebecca said communication, she meant compliance. "The truth is," Richard continued, leaning forward with practiced earnestness, "we never fully expressed our gratitude for your help with the mortgage. That was wrong of us." "It was," I agreed calmly. My simple acknowledgement seemed to throw him off script momentarily. He glanced at Rebecca, who smoothly took over. "Mom, family supports each other. That's what you always taught us. And yes, maybe we've relied on your generosity too much, but we're working on becoming more independent." "I'm glad to hear that." Richard nodded, his confidence returning. "Exactly. And that's why we wanted to have this dinner, to show you we're taking responsibility." The oven timer chimed, and Rebecca excused herself to check on dinner. Richard immediately shifted closer to me on the sofa. "Martha, between us," he lowered, his voice. "Rebecca has been devastated by this rift. She cries at night, worried she's lost her mother." I met his gaze steadily. "How terrible for her." "The thing is," he continued, not registering my lack of emotional response, "we've hit a bit of a rough patch. Just temporary, of course. The new position is fantastic, but the bonus structure is quarterly rather than monthly. It's created a short-term cash flow issue." There it was, the real reason for the dinner invitation. "What about your savings?" I asked innocently. Richard's expression flickered. "Well, with the economy the way it is, investments haven't performed as expected." "And the vacation to Tuscany? Did that impact your finances?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Rebecca mentioned that, did she?" "She did." Rebecca returned, announcing dinner was ready. We moved to the dining room where she'd prepared an elaborate table setting, my grandmother's china, which I'd given her years ago, gleaming under candlelight. "Wine, Mom?" Rebecca offered, already pouring. "No, thank you. I'm driving." "You could always stay over," she suggested. "We could have a nice breakfast tomorrow, keep talking things through." I smiled. "That's thoughtful, but I have plans in the morning." "Oh?" Rebecca looked genuinely surprised that I might have a life beyond their needs. "What plans?" "I've joined the community garden committee. We're preparing the herb beds tomorrow." Richard served the roast chicken, which was admittedly delicious. As we ate, Rebecca steered the conversation to neutral topics: Michael's new promotion, an upcoming family wedding, neighborhood gossip. It was almost like old times, except for the undercurrent of tension. After dinner, as Rebecca cleared the plates, Richard disappeared briefly, returning with a folder. My instincts immediately went on alert. "Martha," he began, setting the folder on the table, "we've been thinking about your financial situation." "My financial situation is just fine, thank you." He pushed forward, undeterred. "We've worked up some numbers, looking at your retirement funds, your projected expenses, and what you could reasonably contribute to the family without impacting your lifestyle. I stared at him, astonished by his audacity. "You did what?" Rebecca quickly rejoined us, placing a hand on my arm. "Mom, we're just trying to help. We know money management can be overwhelming at your age." I gently but firmly removed her hand. "I'm 66, not 96, and I have a financial advisor who helps me manage my money quite competently." Richard opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets and charts. "According to our calculations, you could easily contribute $2,000 monthly without affecting your standard of living. That's less than before, you'll note." The sheer presumption took my breath away. They weren't even pretending this dinner was about reconciliation anymore. "And this would be for?" "Family support," Rebecca said quickly. "Not just the mortgage, medical expenses, education funds for future grandchildren, family vacations, investments in our shared future." I looked from one expectant face to the other, a calm clarity settling over me. "No." Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, folding my napkin neatly. "I will not be contributing $2,000 monthly or any other amount to your household." Rebecca's facade cracked. "Mom, be reasonable. We've worked so hard on this plan." "I can see that," I replied, gesturing to the folder. "But my answer is still no." Richard's charm vanished entirely. "This is the thanks we get? After we've welcomed you into our home, included you in our lives?" "Included me?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean like when you publicly humiliated me at your promotion party? Or when you called me an ATM with wrinkles behind my back?" "That was a joke," he protested, though his eyes shifted away guiltily. "No, Richard. A joke is something everyone can laugh at. What you did was mockery at the expense of someone who had given you $127,000. Rebecca's eyes widened. "It wasn't that much." "It was exactly that much. I have the records." Richard's face hardened. "You've always been stubborn, Martha. Always keeping score, counting every penny. No wonder John worked himself into an early grave. Living with someone so rigid must have been exhausting. The mention of my late husband, twisted into a weapon, should have wounded me deeply. Instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. They had finally dropped all pretense. I stood up. "Thank you for dinner. It was illuminating." Rebecca jumped up. "You're leaving? Just like that?" "Yes, just like that." "What about family?" she demanded, tears welling in her eyes. "What about loyalty?" "I've been loyal for years," I said gently. "I've supported you financially, emotionally, in every way a mother could. But loyalty goes both ways, Rebecca, and respect is non-negotiable." Richard snorted. "Great speech, very dramatic. What happens when you need us? When you're older, frailer, unable to care for yourself?" I met his gaze squarely. "I'll manage." Just as I've always managed. Rebecca followed me to the door, her composure crumbling. "Mom, please. We can work something out. A smaller amount, maybe?" I turned to face my daughter one last time. "Rebecca, I will always love you. My door is always open if you want to visit. As family, not as financial dependents. But the Bank of Martha is permanently closed." I left them standing in the doorway, Rebecca crying theatrically, Richard's face darkened with fury. As I drove away, I felt no sadness, only the peaceful certainty that I had finally done the right thing. 6 months later, I stood in the community garden, surveying the flourishing herb beds with pride. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, and mint created a tapestry of colors and scents that attracted butterflies and bees by the dozens. "It's magnificent," Henry said beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. Over the months, our friendship had deepened into something more, companionship, support, and eventually a gentle romance that had taken us both by surprise. "The children's section loves your mint," he continued. The teacher said they can't stop rubbing the leaves and smelling their fingers. I smiled, remembering how Rebecca had loved doing the same thing in my garden as a child. The thought brought a familiar pang, but no longer the sharp grief of before. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. All set for lunch tomorrow? Sophie can't wait to see her grandma. I typed back a quick confirmation. My relationship with my son had strengthened over the past months as he'd seen me stand my ground. He'd even begun bringing his daughter Sophie for regular visits, a genuine desire for family connection, not a financial strategy. Rebecca and Richard had finally sold their too expensive house, downsizing to something within their actual means. We spoke occasionally, stilted conversations where Rebecca carefully avoided any mention of money. It wasn't the close relationship I'd once hoped for, but it was honest, and that was worth more than false harmony. Penny, for your thoughts? Henry asked. Just reflecting on how much has changed since that dinner party. He nodded understandingly. Henry knew my story. I'd shared it one evening over tea in his garden. Rather than judgment, he'd offered perspective. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for others is to stop enabling them. As we walked through the garden, greeting other volunteers and community members, I felt a deep contentment settle in my bones. My retirement fund was secure, growing modestly under Harriet's watchful eye. My house was protected in the trust Patricia had established. My days were filled with purpose and genuine connections. That terrible moment at Richard's promotion party, standing frozen in the spotlight while strangers laughed, had been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to see what I'd been blind to for years. That true dignity comes not from what we give others, but from what we refuse to surrender. As Henry and I left the garden hand in hand, planning our dinner and an evening of jazz at the local music venue, I realized I was happier at 66 than I'd been in years. Not because I had more, but because I had finally recognized my own worth. The Bank of Martha was closed forever. But Martha herself? She was flourishing.